I find that people here are happy. It's one of the only places that I've been to where people seem genuinely happy to be here and happy to live here, and you know, riding in fast cars, arresting people, and I think I lost my identity. I was the only police officer in the whole of...
Welcome to the Melanated Files. In this series we highlight and share the stories of black people from across the globe. Remember to subscribe to this channel for weekly videos and also follow us on social media for regular updates. Let's get into the interview.
Seem to get you off my mind, and I know it's true, and I'll say this to you: I want you back. There's something inside, yeah, there's something inside that brings me back to you, yeah. No, I can't hide it, no, I can't hide it anymore.
My name is Roxie. I'm from London. I was previously living in Hong Kong for about a year, and I moved to Singapore in about December. So I've been here for about 5-6 months. Well, we moved to Hong Kong because of my husband's job, and I was working in the legal sector in Hong Kong, and then I started teaching. And then my husband got the opportunity to move to Singapore, and so we kind of left kind of in a hurry, actually. We didn't have a lot of time to really think about it. So I didn't do much like research or worrying about moving to Singapore like I did with Hong Kong, whereas I had a year to think about moving to Hong Kong. Singapore, I had about 2 months. But it's been a hugely beneficial and amazing decision. Okay, so my first impressions of Singapore were straight off the back of Hong Kong, which is full of really tall buildings, lots of people, not much green space. My first impressions of Singapore was it's so green, and like everyone says, it's so clean, and there's so much space. And obviously I live in this park, well, not in this park, but a condo adjacent to this park. So we've just had the opportunity to kind of be in a more peaceful setting, because we lived right in the center of Hong Kong, and in London we lived kind of quite centrally as well. At the moment I'm working, I'm starting to DJ in Singapore, which is quite random, but it's something I've always wanted to do. And I started doing stand-up comedy as well. In September I'm going to be starting my master's degree in law. I started volunteering for a charity called Project X, which works with sex workers in Singapore to help empower them and, you know, keep them safe, because prostitution's legal here, but they're not treated very well. I hope to continue doing the kind of legal work I was doing in London, which is around helping vulnerable women, working in the violence against women sector, that sort of thing. But I'm still finding my feet here, and until I finish my master's, I'm not quite sure what that looks like. I think I like the food here in Singapore, and I really enjoy the Singaporean culture. It feels like they have a real identity here, and there's so much to kind of learn from how they operate. And you know, I think yesterday I was walking past and there was a Mona Lisa picture of the Mona Lisa eating a durian, and I just think that that's totally Singapore, and I love things like that. The least, I think, probably the heat, and sometimes there's a lack of finding places to find food that I miss from back home. I know that sounds really shallow, but sometimes I'm just missing certain brands, clothes that fit. It's almost impossible to find clothes my size here, unless I go to H&M or fast fashion places that I try and avoid. And it's quite small. I'm not used to living in such a small populated place. So you see everyone and everyone sees you. You can't really get away with anything here. I'm used to living in London and Hong Kong, where everything's there's so many more people. I kind of miss that and don't miss that at the same time. I have no idea which one's a fact. I have noticed that you don't see any chewing gum marks on the floor. And taxes for alcohol is pretty high here. But I don't know any of the rules that people say are really like stressful. And all the ones that people talk about, they don't seem to affect me anyway. I didn't chew gum before. It's not a big part of my life. Although I think I've seen people chew gum. I just don't think they litter. I have noticed though that if there's a crime that's been committed in Singapore, they put like a sign that tells you the crime and when it happened. And I think that's really funny because like if that was in London, there'd be signs everywhere and they would be pretty big. But I saw one in Bishan the other day that just said mischief. And that's like something that they thought to put out there. So I don't know, it's kind of a strange place for crime. It doesn't seem to be like that it affects people's lives that much. My favorite food in Singapore is, I like vegan laksa, if I can find it. I like monkey nut mushrooms. I like Peranakan food, I think that's how you pronounce it. Me and my husband are reducing our meat intake and we're living a more vegan lifestyle, and that's amazing in Singapore. It's hard, but it's amazing. It's something my husband told me yesterday, which is not to argue someone out of a position that they didn't come to via reason, which is like an amazing insight. And it basically says like if someone didn't get somewhere through a reasonable way, then you can't argue with them in a reasonable way. It's just stopping me from basically wasting my time arguing, going back and forth with people. You know, being a black woman in Singapore, I have appreciated like the company and the companionship and the diversity of black people, particularly in Singapore, because the expat community here is quite small. And I would say most of my friends, most of the people that I go out with are from the small black community groups that we've formed. And it's something that you wouldn't necessarily need where I'm from in London, because, you know, we have a huge black community in London and you don't even call them the black community. They're just your community or your friends or where you live. But here it feels like, you know, we're a community and we're all experiencing the same thing. And it's just been amazing. I didn't have that so much in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, it's like the British community. So all of my friends seem to be like people from the UK and, you know, diverse. But over here, it is people from all over the black diaspora. I think that, so it's really funny. I first got to know the attitude of Singaporeans through the comedy. So when I first got here, I started doing stand-up comedy, and obviously I see a lot of stand-up comedy from Singaporeans, and a lot of Singaporeans will tell jokes about black people that come purely from stereotypes and not from like experience. And I've actually had to say to some of them who are friends, like, when you're doing comedy, if you don't know the person and it's quite clear you don't know the person, then it can never be funny. Of course you can do jokes about different races of people, but it's only funny if it's part of an actual lived experience, not sort of taken from movies or music videos and things like that. Some of the things they say, it would surprise me, because I know they haven't met those types of stereotypes before, you know, especially not here in Singapore. They'll laugh at it because they think that is what is the case, and it's like, if you go and do those jokes back, you know, in America or the UK or Jamaica or Africa, they're not gonna land because they're so dated. I remember speaking to this lady and she was asking me about my hair, and she was like, how do you get your hair like that? And as a joke I said, oh no, it just grows this way. And like her face, she was so shocked, like my hair like grows like this, like these are strands. And she honestly, I was like, no, I'm kidding, like I do this thing. But that was probably the funniest because she was so shocked. And I thought, you really don't know. You really don't know. And then the next question is like, how do you wash it? And I'm like, with shampoo and like conditioner and sometimes apple cider vinegar once a week. I interlock my hair because it doesn't really respond to retwisting. So I interlock it with a little tool, which means I can do it as and when I feel like it, and I don't have to stick to a schedule. But my hair's pretty free. The most profound difference, I guess, would be the political situation here. The UK is currently going through a lot politically with the Brexit and, you know, the way that the discourse is kind of shifted into, you know, this referendum culture where everyone's opinions seem to be quite polarizing. In Singapore, I haven't had conversations with people who are overly critical or who have the same sorts of taxi driver opinions that you might find in London or parts of the UK. And I think that that is just how maybe restrictive things are politically here in terms of your freedoms and how you're able to express, you know, your opinions about the government. But I don't know. But I would say that was probably the most profound difference. And also, London is one of the most diverse cities in the world in terms of racial diversity, something that you may not necessarily, well, you won't get in Singapore. If I could change anything in the world, I would probably change systematic oppression. I would make it harder for people to get away with it. Or maybe I would, if I could, raise people's consciousnesses a bit, so that people are more resistant to systematic oppression. I think rather than changing one thing, I would change people so that everything changed. I think I would love to speak to Nina Simone because I think that we share a lot of similarities in the way that we think, and I find her artistry really resonates with me in quite a profound way. And the way that she writes to express herself and some of her experiences. But I don't know. I don't know what I would say to her. My proudest accomplishment was my degree in law, and I used to work helping women escape domestic violence and human trafficking. And I think that pretty much anyone that I helped in the time that I was working, I would say it was more their achievement because they're the ones with the strength, but I'm pretty proud of the work that I did. The biggest lesson I've learned in life is that you can't always change people's opinions via dialogue. It has to be via actions, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense. I think arguing with people out of their positions has never worked, but by showing people that things can be different, I find has made more of a difference. My earliest memory was visiting my dad at his fire station when I was like 3, and I don't even know if that's a real memory. I think I've just been told the story a couple hundred times, and there's pictures of it. I definitely know it's my earliest photo. I'd say that we have the ability to change anything that we want to change. I would say it's just dormant in everyone that you can make a difference. You just have to be more passionate about it, more aware of what it is, and work together. You know, there's so much going on in the world at the moment that's awful, and I think that if everyone collectively worked together to change it and cared about it, then it could be done.
What's one thing that Singapore does really well that the world can learn from?
I find that people here are happy. It's one of the only places that I've been to where people seem genuinely happy to be here and happy to live here, and they have provided people with housing. There's very little unemployment here. If not the world, then definitely where I come from in the UK.
What's your favorite place in Singapore?
White Label. It's this like small little record shop club, and I'm always taking people there, and I'm always telling people to go there. I've been there and listened to like Malaysian funk music or drum and bass or house. Like, they have a huge selection of music and appreciation. I love that place.
Any advice for black people looking to come here to work or live, etc.?
Just do it. Don't even think about it. Like anywhere that you want to go to, just do it. Like everyone has reservations, everyone thinks about how they're going to be treated or their hair, and I get that. Like not everyone can take maybe being different. Everyone has a different threshold, but try it. You can always go back, you know? Trust me, I was not interested in traveling. I was really happy. Oh, there's a dog. I was really happy, you know, just being in London, doing what I was doing, but it's changed. Like my perception of home isn't what it was anymore.
What's a common misconception about Singapore?
I think the most common is that it's boring. It's definitely not boring. There's so much to do here. You just have to be interesting and you have to find it and you have to be proactive, but it's definitely not boring. That's what people were telling me in Hong Kong, like, oh, you're moving to Singapore, isn't it really boring? Absolutely not.
Is there something in Singapore that you think deserves more media coverage?
I don't know, because I don't know how much Singapore wants covered in the media. Maybe their housing policies and how well they're doing in terms of housing people. That's something that I don't see necessarily in the media. But to be honest with you, if we're talking about the media from, say, the UK, I don't think they cover enough international news anyway. There's so much from other places that they could be covering, but they're focused solely on America. The biggest risk I taken was I used to be a police officer, and by all accounts it was a steady job with a pension and I could do that for 35 years, but I really didn't enjoy it, and my biggest risk was quitting and studying to become a lawyer. So when I was 18, I went to this like career fair for the police, got an application form. My dad helped me with this application form, didn't think anything of it. 6 months later they were like, you got in, after an interview obviously. And I found myself at 19 years old with the whole silly outfit that the police officers wear, you know, riding in fast cars, arresting people, and I think I lost my identity. I was the only police officer in the whole of a borough called Croydon. British people will know that one, but it's a pretty big place. It's predominantly black, and I was the only female black officer. So I wasn't the only black officer, but I was definitely the only female there. And I was quite young, I was quite impressionable. It is quite a right-wing kind of white space. And I think I found myself and my opinions at such a young age being formed in that space. So by the time I was 21, I realized that I wanted to go back into academia. So I didn't have a chance to go to university, so I decided to go to university, studied English, went on to study law, and then went to work with women, violence against women in the legal sector. And it's just been a wild ride ever since. And then I ended up in Hong Kong, and now I'm in Singapore. So your life can do a whole, this was in the space of 10 years, the whole 360. The direction that my life was going to go in compared to where it is now. And if it wasn't for that risk, I don't know where I would be. Maybe I'd be in a better position, maybe a worse, I don't know. But I think it'd be pretty boring if I hadn't taken any risks.
What was the most challenging part of that job?
The most challenging part of that job was the fact that I was expected to be kind of like a tough police officer who wanted to just arrest as many people as I could, and that was kind of the standard set. They didn't appreciate that I wanted to be the type of police officer that was empathetic to victims and understood that people get into situations based on systematic oppression sometimes, not because they're born bad. The toughest job was seeing people be racially profiled and not having the confidence at such a young age to speak up for it. I know if I joined now, like, it would be a whole different thing. And it was just draining, working so many hours and seeing some of the worst parts of the city every day, and feeling kind of jaded.
On this side of the fence now, is there, or in hindsight, you know, all that you've been through so far to this point, is there any advice you could give them, like something that you think they should consider implementing, or a possible change to make that institution better?
The police?
Yes.
In the UK?
Yes.
So what I will say is, I know that the police in America get a lot of press because of the police brutality. The police in the UK don't have guns. which is amazing. They've had to come up with tactics to disarm people and to de-escalate situations without resulting in death, which I think is amazing, and they could, you know, spread that across the pond. But they still have issues with racially profiling people. They still have a diversity problem. They still have a problem with how they treat women, domestic violence victims. I've spoken to police officers I used to work with, and it wasn't until I started working with domestic violence victims that I realized that the police don't see that as part of their role. And that's a big issue because they're the first responders. It's a huge part of their role. One thing that I always thought would be a good idea is to take rape investigations away from the police and form a separate task force to deal with it, maybe doctors and nurses as opposed to police officers, because the forensic side of things is not done by police officers, it's done by forensic scientists. The police officers, they do the interviewing of the victims and the perpetrators, but I don't see why they should do the interviewing of the victims. There's nothing to say that a police officer is better at that. In fact, by all accounts, they're worse. And you know, the forensic investigation of the victim is done in the hospitals anyway. So I think that would be more beneficial, but I'm not quite sure how that would look.
Do you have a secret superpower, something that you're really good at that is not well known?
Yes, I can find things really easily. Like if someone tells me that they've lost something, I'm really good at finding it, particularly around my house. I'm also really good with animals, particularly dogs. Like I have a passion for dogs, and for some reason they just like me. Okay, so you can find me on Instagram because I'm working on my DJing and I put gigs up there, and I play Afrobeat and reggae music. Something that we're lacking is like the London sound, music that we're used to back home. So I'm trying to play that as much as possible. So if you want to come to one of my gigs, if you think Singapore is boring, come, we'll have a good time. My Instagram is roxie.le.fox. So roxie.le.fox, F-O-X.
Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to share your story or have us visit your region, send us a message on any of our social media platforms or via our website.
That's good.